Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're joining us from. Welcome to this webinar on building a new generation of ocean citizens, what role for ocean literacy and ocean science communication. On behalf of the organizers, thank you very much for taking out time and being here with us today for this 1-hour webinar. Before we start, and for the ones that have joined a little bit earlier, we remind you that we have interpretation available in English, French, Russian, and Spanish. You can use the interpretation tool at the bottom of your screen. We will also have a Q&A live session at the end of the webinar. So we have activated the Q&A box that is right below the screen. If you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. For any technical issues, please use also the chat box and our technicians will be ready to help you. Now, I see that participants are still coming. Hopefully, most of them have come, and I would like to start by introducing myself and the speakers of today's session, as well as the objective of the webinar. So my name is Elisabetta Bonotto. I work as project coordinator and communication focal point at the Ocean Science section of the IOC. I am an environmental scientist and economist by training, and I have a specialization in environmental communication and education. And I have been working on ocean-related matters for the past 5 years. I am delighted to introduce you to the speakers of the webinar. So some of them are also my colleagues. We'll start with Francesca Santoro, Ocean Literacy Program Specialist at IOC UNESCO. Then Professor Ronaldo Cristofoletti from the Federal University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, Institute of Marine Sciences. Vinicius Lindoso, Communication Officer at IOC and former colleague. And we'll conclude with Kira Coley, editor at Echo Magazine. These wonderful speakers will guide us through the principles, the key features, the differences, but also the points of contact in between ocean literacy and ocean science communication. And at the end, we will have the Q&A session, and we'll make sure we'll address all of your questions after the presentations. So now, without further ado, I would like to leave over to Francesca Santoro, the first speaker of today. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elisabetta, and thanks to all for joining us for this webinar that are organized in preparation or in advance of our IOC General Assembly. So the topic of today is to talk about ocean literacy and ocean science communication, and really to discuss and reflect on what are the differences and similarities and linkages between these two topics and field of expertise and also of research. So I'm gonna take you through some slides that will discuss in particular what we are developing in the context of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for what regards ocean literacy. Here you can see a framework that we have developed in order to guide all of the actions, projects, programs, and activities that will be developed in the context of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. The IOC has started to work on ocean literacy a little bit more than 5 years ago. And since then, a lot of discussions and a lot of reflections have been going around what actually do we mean by ocean literacy. As you might know, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept was developed in the US It was a group of scientists and educators that started from realizing that there was very little ocean knowledge in formal education. And in order to find a way to include more ocean content into formal education, they've developed a framework that is based on 7 essential principles that I like to call the ABC of ocean knowledge. Through this initial initiative in the US, a lot of other countries and regions have picked up the concept and adapted and included in their not only formal education, I would say, but also non-formal education. Since then, the scope, I would say, of ocean literacy has changed quite a lot from being an approach or a goal, I would say, for mainly for the formal education sector, to something that we can definitely apply to the society as a whole. We need to have more ocean literate policy makers, decision makers, entrepreneurs, and citizens, of course, in order to be able to deal with the urgent challenges that we have to consider in the context of ocean health. And in particular, of course, we all know that now we have this initiative of the UN Decade of Ocean Science that will help us gathering all stakeholders around a common vision and a common mission, which is, as you might know, going from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. So in order to, let's say, provide a framework to all stakeholders interested in ocean literacy, we have worked with ocean literacy experts, practitioners, but also experts and stakeholders from different sectors, not only those that are already expert in ocean literacy. So we have organized large consultation with all of them. We have also organized a participatory workshop here in Venice, where I'm based, in order to really discuss what type of elements we should highlight for ocean literacy in the context of the decade. So we came up with this framework that you can see in this slide, which is made of 3 main elements. So one, at the basis of all of our discussion is the context. And for the context, we have, in particular, wanted to highlight that through ocean literacy, we want to promote what we have called an inclusive science narrative. We want, and this is something that the decade is really pushing a lot for, so that everybody feels engaged and that everybody feels that they can participate in scientific endeavors and in particular in all of the initiatives that we are going to develop for ocean literacy in the decade. So we have highlighted some inclusive values: inclusion, diversity, collaboration, equity, but we have also based our framework on some existing theoretical and practical approaches like innovation, future thinking, participatory science, and action-oriented research, inquiry-based learning, science communication, something that we're going to discuss in this webinar, and individual and collective action. Of course, as mentioned, we want to engage all of the stakeholders that can bring something to this discussion and these activities that we are going to develop in the context of the decade. And so you can see we have really highlighted different types of stakeholders, including intergovernmental organization, government representatives, civil society, but also educators, museum, artists, media, donors, and foundation. And at the center, of course, of this framework, we have the activities that we are going to develop in the context of the decade, in particular also highlighting what ocean literacy is about, which is about learning, but is about also contributing. Through ocean literacy, we want to provide tools and approaches to people and empower people to really feel engaged and feel part of all of the initiatives. And all of this, of course, to contribute to the UN Decade Challenges, Objectives and Outcome. As you might know, the decade has identified 10 challenges and 7 outcomes, and one of them specifically is related to ocean literacy, which is the 7th outcomes called An Engaging and Inspiring Ocean. And of course, in the end, what we want to do is really to contribute to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, not only, of course, of SDG 14, but also in particular for what regards ocean literacy, SDG 4, which is about quality education, but many others: sustainable consumption and production, climate action, biodiversity. So really highlighting the central role of the ocean in all the UN Agenda 2030. So going a little bit into the details of this framework and of the priority areas that we have identified, as you can see through this consultation that I was mentioning before, we have identified 4 priority areas: formal education, advancing policy, corporate action, and community engagement. And here I'm bringing some examples of what we are envisioning for these different priorities. For example, mainstreaming ocean literacy in education policy. This is something that we are working a lot also with our colleagues in the education sector in UNESCO. The idea is really to inform policymakers and develop policy and mechanisms to strengthen ocean literacy through formal and non-formal education systems. Some recommended activities are establishing a national ocean literacy strategy, working to include ocean literacy in national curriculum, developing training programs for example, government officials, and of course, investments in ocean literacy for the education sector. Of course, enhancing formal education means enhancing ocean literacy in every formal education institution at every level. We need to start from very young kids. We need to also consider ocean literacy in the overall discussion on the education, on the future of education, that after the pandemic is really something that the global community is thinking about. So using a multi and even inter and transdisciplinary approach, cross-cutting approaches, but also highlighting that ocean literacy can provide opportunity to enhance critical thinking, problem solving, and leadership skills. Some recommended activities, again, developing training programs. This is something that all of the teachers are telling us. They don't feel confident in teaching about ocean topics in school because they don't have that type of trainings in their during their career. Of course, knowledge exchange between formal educators and experts, developing curriculum material, and also very importantly, create opportunities for nature-based opportunities. Mobilizing corporate action. This is something very important as well. As I said before, we need to engage all stakeholders and also the corporations that are more and more interested in ocean topics, because they can be also part of the work that we are going to develop. Some recommended activities: integrating ocean literacy into corporate social responsibility policies, priorities, and initiatives, developing training programs for employees, investments in incubators focused on ocean innovation, technology, sustainability, and social enterprise, and also development of programs that empower marginalized and unrepresented groups. And finally, increasing community engagement. Of course, citizens and communities around the world, being them in urban, rural, coastal, and non-coastal environments, they have a role to play in enhancing ocean literacy. So for community engagement, we mean all so-called non-formal education activities, which are developed by NGOs, aquaria, zoos all around the world. Some recommended actions are interactive intervention of ocean literacy, public awareness campaign, and I think we're going to hear more about that by the other speakers. Citizen science programs, really important, this topic, because not only citizens can work and help scientists to collect the data they need, but also through this citizen science program, citizens better understand what it means to do science and to do research. Knowledge exchange and training program for media. So this is in a nutshell what we are trying to develop in ocean literacy. I really would like to highlight again that ocean literacy is a concept that is really evolving. We hope that during the decade we're going to be able to engage more and more people in ocean literacy. And thanks for your attention. And I pass back the floor to my colleague Elisabetta. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for being so quick in giving us an overview of all the principles of ocean literacy, and to start in a way also introducing our next speaker, who will talk more about good practices, so how to move from the theory to practice with ocean literacy activities. I am delighted to introduce you to Professor Ronaldo Cristofoletti, who will give us a presentation on good practices in ocean literacy. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta, Francesca, and everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and with you all, with the Ocean Day arriving, and we can discuss so many things. I get from this amazing introduction that Francesca gave us, from this concept of the ocean literacy, to think what is behind it. So as Elisabetta said, how we move from the theory to the practice. So I'm Ronaldo, I'm from Brazil, at the Federal University of São Paulo. I'm also collaborating in the IOC Communication Divisor Group for the UN Ocean Decade. So it's a pleasure to see and discuss a little bit these links about, between ocean literacy and the communication. So when we consider the ocean literacy concept, as Francesca was presenting us the framework, it is about the influence of the oceans in our life and from our actions to the ocean. So the point is, how can we achieve this, and how can we achieve that framework and the desired results that Francesca presented us in a more powerful way? So when we consider that, Francesca presented us many four main target groups there. And let's say that we consider that discussing the influence of the oceans in our lives and our actions in the ocean, who is the our? We're talking about, who is our audience? And considering that, you need to consider there is a range of age, institutions, knowledge background behind it. We can be talking to single persons that live by the sea or far away from the sea. And we can talk with institutions that are in the educational area or policymakers that at the beginning, they don't consider they have anything related to the ocean. How can we properly engage with them? The ocean literacy, I mean, this concept, it goes much beyond the disseminating information. It's something of a change of behavior. The ocean literacy brings the transformative science concept of the UN Ocean Decade. There is a science that is built together. There is a science where all stakeholders discuss from the beginning to the development to the delivery of the outputs. So that is ocean literacy. So if you have so different audiences we are interested, we need to know them, and we need to consider properly how to address the ocean issue we want with them. So what we want is everybody start to have a critical evaluation of our actions and knowledge now, but with a view of the future. how can we change to have this better world? And how can we change that considering the ocean? So if you look for this society and getting from main groups, as Francesca already presented us, talking with schools or working with schools is one way. So we have, for example, the Blue Schools concept that was implemented and developed by Portugal and now is growing overall in the world, in Europe. Today will be the launch of the All Atlantic Blue Schools Network. So it's a movement linking countries of the Atlantic. And all of them, they bring this for this educational system. First in practice, engaging schools, teachers, and students, and all the schools community on how can they include the ocean topics in their curriculum, in their CVs, in their actions in the schools already. Until, like Francesca told us, we arrive for the policies, the educational policies, where we have a change. Now, the educational policies don't say that ocean is a priority topic in the curriculums. We need to, so we have, for example, the Blue Schools as a good example for the educational system. When you consider the decision makers, we have to adapt and work the best ideas of the 7 principles of the ocean literacy, of the 7 outcomes and the 10 challenges of the UN Ocean Decade for local, national, global decision makers. They need a synthesis of knowledge, of the best knowledge available that can support their decision making, that can have them making the best decision for the ocean, for the sustainability of the ocean. We start to have a greater engagement of the private sector, where the process of production of the process of development, innovation, starts to consider, okay, how can we have our internal process of production in a better way of the ocean? Talking about the private sector is not only about their investment supporting ocean literacy, it's about their changing their processes, looking for the sustainability of the ocean. And we have some examples. IOC is leading some events and some change where some of these companies are already making a difference. And as Francesca also showed, the communities as a whole and the local communities. So when we say about the educational system, it's not only about what is in the school, is also what is beyond the walls of the school, is integrating the non-formal spaces of learning with the formal spaces of learning and with the civil society. So it's outreach, it's having engagement, it's having the ocean literacy present every day, everywhere, somewhere, in order that every single person, you start to look, what can I do to make some difference in this process? So more than being presenting specific cases and things, I chose 5 topics that I believe that would bring us good practice for all that desirable outputs or for the audience. First, we need everybody understanding the ocean and understanding the influence of the ocean in our lives and from our actions in the ocean, and owning this process. So it's more than receiving an information. It's integrating that in their daily actions. And to do that, a very important point, from my point of view, is change one word. We do not have to say or do ocean literacy to someone else. It's with them. We need to engage. We need to invite them to be with us. We need to listen more than talking. We need to know what are their desires, what are their gaps, where they want to go. And then from there, we build together this transformative science. We bring the scientific knowledge, because this is the UN Ocean Science Decade. It's the role of science for this transformation. Also, it's not only about the ocean as an environment, but it's about our citizenship. It's our values as citizens for a better world. And that leads us, if you're doing all together, collaborating, being inclusive, and we are thinking that as citizenship, we have an opportunity for a behavioral change or a systems change. The behavioral change will be the change of the individuals or even the institutions. The systems change will be the changes in policymakers, in big institutions, where they will influence somehow in top-down process. But to achieve a behavioral change and system change, we need to be together all the time. We need to bring the information. We need to include ocean citizenship, Agenda 2030, by the view of the SDG 14. And for all of that, the communication among all these audiences is very important. So we need to be communicating all the time, but communicating the right way. So considering doing with everybody instead to everybody would be the best practice that we would have independent of our audience and desirable outputs. I think these are the main topics I would like to share now and open for the Q&A afterwards. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo, for this wonderful presentation. And it contained already a lot of elements that will help us introduce the next segment on ocean science communication. So it's, as you said, we need to talk to people with them. And the real question is, how do we communicate in a good way, especially on a particular topic, not always easy as ocean science. So this brings me to the next speaker, Vinicius Lindoso, who is a communication officer at the IOC and has been leading communication efforts for the Ocean Decade as well. Vini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Thank you very much. And hi to everyone. I'm really glad to be part of this pre-IOC Assembly webinar. Communication is what I do on a daily basis at work. And at the same time, in the operationalization of everything, you know, the institutional communications, the Ocean Decade, it's good to have an opportunity to stop and think about what we're doing and think about whether you know, what we're trying to do, whether we are doing the right thing. So it's great to bring this to you. Now, I won't talk too much about the institutional part of the communications that I work on and help coordinate, because you see this every day. You see this on social media. You see this in every way in which we push out news about what IOC is doing programmatically across our rich and diversity of topics. But what I'd like to do here is to introduce, because it's a long conversation, and the heart of the issue of what we're trying to do when we communicate about ocean and ocean science. And particularly in the context of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which has been occupying a lot of our minds at the moment. Within the coordination unit, what is it that we'd like to get out by 2030 in terms of how people relate to and how people identify with the ocean and ocean knowledge. So I will share my screen, and I hope that you are all able to see it. So can everyone see it?
Yes, not yet.
Cool.
Not yet.
Sorry, I forgot to click share. Now that should be okay. Great. So I'd like to tell you a story, and it's both a story of one individual, but that encapsulates the larger story that we're trying to tell, and it's the story of an ocean science revolution, which is exactly what the Ocean Decade hopes to bring about, and something that IOC has been spearheading, you know, through the actions of Francesca, Ronaldo, and many others out there, both at the global and national level. And the individual story that I like to tell you about is about Gladys Abu, who is a young doctor from the Solomon Islands, but who also is a former winner of the Miss Solomon pageant contest. And she's a really amazing activist and also researcher in her own right about how to combine the knowledge that we're getting about the ocean from the scientific community to the knowledge that has been passed around for generations, particularly in coastal communities and in the Pacific. And when I heard the story of Gladys, and when I got to interact with her a little bit, it really got to me that this is what we should be trying to incorporate into any kind of communications that we do about the ocean, is to give it a face. Because, and this is my first argument, is that the ocean is ultimately about not the animals, not the water itself. It's not the planet, it's about people and their stories. Now, when I say this, I am not minimizing the value of the environment and the planet, because we live in it, we derive benefits from it. Without it, we could not survive. But it is because when you do communications, you have to have a somewhat skeptic and somewhat pragmatic approach in that what is it that is going to take your story through the most effective way to people and make them care. And one of the probably sort of late effects of the Enlightenment and humanist literature is that humans in general care about other humans and what it is that we go through and what impacts we suffer on our daily lives. So inherently, we engage with stories about the environment, and in this case, about the ocean, through the effect and the impacts that it has on us. That's why ocean literacy is so important and why it is a critical pillar of broader mass communication, because it is really about getting people to understand the impact of the ocean on them and their impact on the ocean. It is this sort of symbiosis that every ocean story needs to understand and use for the best level possible. And so sea level rise, which is the problem that Gladys faced and that her grandparents faced because they saw their island disappear, is often portrayed as an issue, sort of for the marginal parts of the, let's say, European-centered media outlets. But what we need to understand is that, one, sea level rise is not a topic that will become critically important in 50 years. It's already happening. And two, it's not just happening to Gladys and her grandparents. It's happening not just to coastal communities in the Pacific or in the African coasts or in the Caribbean. It's something that's happening, in the very heart of developed economies as well. And I just give you there an example. In the United States, over 400 towns are expected to flood on a regular basis by the end of the century. And when I say 400 towns, I don't mean just the sort of backwater kind of place that you see in sort of films about the American Midwest, but I mean major cities, and that includes Manhattan, New York City. So it's something to get us thinking. But in the context of telling the story of people, we also have to focus on the science and the knowledge. And here, you may see science and knowledge used interchangeably, because I like to refer to knowledge most of the times as it's more inclusive, and it includes both scientific understanding and sort of what's coming from the heritage of indigenous communities and being practiced in a lot of countries around the world. So we need to understand the science, and we should be mindful that what seems simple with science almost never is. So just as an example, a lot of cleanup, ocean cleanup solutions are lambasted around the media as the amazing findings, etc. But we need to dig a little deeper and see how is science and knowledge backing that? Are they tested? Are there any side effects? And in this era where you have fake news, you have half-truths, you have a lot of deviations to knowledge-based reporting out there, it's even more important. So ultimately, looking at the dramatic importance of telling the story of people and the dramatic importance of understanding and telling also a story that is essentially of understanding and knowledge, what are we trying to do in the next 10 years? And here I'm saying, whether it's in the context of the ocean decade, but also in the context of our everyday activities that we will see both from the IOC, but also from a number of partners, and nationally in a number of the countries that are present here today. We are trying to get the ocean out of the environment page. Now, this is how I sum up the strategy of communication personally. That's my strategy. Of course, everyone will have their own mantra, but this is my mantra, has been for a few months now. And it's something that I push every time I'm asked to talk about communications, because I think that we are doing the ocean a disservice when we narrow its scope down to really environmental topics. Because ocean is about everything. The ocean is about fashion, it's about culture, it's about the economy, it's about politics, decision making. At its most grandiose level, it's about life. And we shouldn't forget that, but also we should encourage that perception, whether it's talking to journalists, whether it's talking to people who are reading the news and reading our communication that we get out every day, is that it is not just about the environment. Of course, it is about the environment, but it's about something much larger than that. The way that we are approaching is sort of in a three-part, and how we can get the ocean out of the environment page. It is uncovering the stories, uncover the stories about ocean in all the various diverse realms that we read about and live with in our everyday lives. Then it's understanding how is it that the ocean interacts in those ways, and where are the scientific problems inherent in those? What are the gaps? What are the findings that are coming up? And there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And it's putting those two pieces together that we create a ocean story that is both based on critical knowledge, but also able to broaden the engagement in all sectors of our audiences, whether you're talking to policymakers or to interested citizens. Now, I just wanted to, before I conclude, bring about two activities that we are putting together in the context of the Ocean Decade, but which are essentially IOC activities, and that I'm very happy to contribute to. So one is we are putting together a global ocean media coalition. This is something that we're doing with partners at Spark News, but also something that is already happening nationally, and then without giving away too much, Ronaldo, whom you just heard from, is doing a lot of this media coalition buildup in Brazil at the moment, and I think we're going to get some great impacts there in the next few months, and hopefully that will serve as a pilot for other countries. But essentially what this media coalition is trying to do is to have that kind of talk with reporters and with journalists and with bloggers and influencers, not to them about the ocean, and tell them exactly that mantra. Let's get the ocean out of the environment page, and let's get ocean stories out in, ideally every single section of the newspaper or of the magazines that we see around as we go by in our daily lives. So the work with the media is critically important, but also going beyond that to embrace greater society. And that's what the official mass communications campaign of the Ocean Decade, which is called Generation Ocean, is going to do. And it's going to do that through, one, identifying the stories of people who are acting based on knowledge to safeguard and increase ocean knowledge around the world. And also to inspire everyone to be a part of this new Generation Ocean. It's a lot of people, when I say to them Generation Ocean, they think it's about youth, but it's really not just about youth. We want to deconstruct the term generation. It's about getting people to care, because we have a responsibility, whether we are 9 or 90. If we are alive in the world today, we have a responsibility to be the first global generation that can save an entire ecosystem. Because if we don't, that will have consequences we cannot even imagine for us and for many generations to come. And I'll leave you there. This was really a brief glimpse because there's not much time, and I fear I may have already gone way beyond that. So I'll give the floor straight back to Elisabetta, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Vinny. That was very comprehensive and very inspiring, even if it was a bit long, but no worries at all. It was nice to hear to all the work that you have already initiated for the Ocean Decade and for building Generation Ocean. I want to be quick as well to turn over to the next speaker. And Vinny has already kind of introduced the topic during his presentation on how magazines and media in general and journalists also can engage in this conversation. So the best person to really answer to the question is our next speaker, Kira Colley, editor at Eco Magazine. Eco Magazine is a marine science publication, and they have been collaborating with the IOC. They have just issued a special issue on the Ocean Decade. So we're all very happy to hear directly from Kira. Kira, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely. I've been sharing stories about the ocean for almost a decade now, and it's an honor to be able to be a senior editor of an ocean science publication to help share these stories to a broader audience. And one thing I've learned that at its best, effective communication can absolutely empower research, but also progress nations towards addressing those global ocean challenges that we've already spoken a little bit about, by improving the relationships with stakeholders in policy, industry, and civil society. So today I would like to briefly discuss 5 best practices that I hope will support you and your organizations in your ocean science communication efforts. So first of all, you need to help your audience connect to the content, but also yourself. As it stands today, science is still seen by many as an elite and inaccessible interest, and scientists can be perceived as competent but cold. Now, this means that when it comes to communicating science, more effort is needed to rehumanize scientists and ensure that the audience can actually connect to that topic. So depending on how you are communicating science, this can be done in several different ways. During events, we not only need to be communicating that science, but also communicating who we are as individuals and where we come from in order to give our expertise context and to gain trust as fellow humans. So one way to do this is to begin a session at an event by introducing each speaker with biographies, along with fun facts that give the audience a small glimpse into who that speaker is. So this tactic immediately makes the speaker more relatable and the audience is more likely to stay engaged. Another important point, no matter your audience, be them policymakers, the general public, topic experts or members of the industry, using everyday words and conversational tones when discussing science is really very important. There is never any reason to use spatial and temporal over space and time, for example. The easier the language, the more likely your message will get across. Also, when talking about ocean science, you should actually avoid, in my opinion, talking about the science. So I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts on this. This might sound a little counterintuitive, but if you can, I believe you should remove as much of the science as possible from the article presentation. Now, by science, what I'm talking about is that pure data and statistics that is often too abstract for people to really understand its importance. Instead, focus on the problem and why the audience should care. So how will it impact their professional or even their personal lives? If data or science terms need to be used, for example, in a report, then you can present that data clearly using some nice visual aids and graphics. And you can also use metaphors and analogies to help provide a little bit more context to that data. So people quickly forget data, which is another reason why I think you should focus on the broader story. But a story will resonate deeply and stay with someone for longer. Therefore, you should absolutely tell a story. As Vinny has very nicely already spoken about so far, there is actually a lot to be said for storytelling. When listening to stories, oxytocin, which is the hormone that plays a role in social bonding, is released. Now that means that stories actually help to create a bond between the speakers and the listeners and grow trust between those two, which in my opinion means that a story is actually one of the most important and powerful tools in the ocean science communication toolbox and really needs to be used more often. So one way to tell a story is by using the simple narrative arc, which you can see in front of you. At the very beginning, you set the scene, you introduce your audience to the characters, the setting, and the seeds of conflict. In the middle, your characters grow and change in response to conflicts and circumstances. They set about trying to resolve that big problem. Usually, then the conflict escalates to that climax. And then in the end, hopefully, the characters resolve that big problem and the story concludes. So using characters or people as, again, Vinny nicely made my point for me, is really important in storytelling because that does help readers or listeners to better relate to that story on a personal level, allows them to understand those challenges with more context behind that, and also it helps them to emotionally connect to that problem. And I think, as we all know by now, if you're emotionally invested in something, you are more likely to make those behavioural changes that are very much needed. So visual storytelling is something that should also be a consideration. For better or worse, science communication is competing with every other form of internet, with the entertainment on the internet. Many readers following links to science stories will also have tabs to Facebook, Twitter, blogs, different media outlets as well on their screens at the same time. However, we are very fortunate in that our ocean offers a vast wealth of very beautiful imagery that can instantly engage with global audiences. So visual storytelling is a great way to engage those audiences back to your tab on the screen in front of them, and keep them reading when they're surrounded by all those other social distractions. So something which has been mentioned already is about inclusivity. So consider how to include diverse voices and perspectives when you are communicating ocean science. So for example, if you live somewhere in Europe and you're writing a story about a mangrove restoration project that your organization is supporting in Thailand, then try to get quotes from locals so that you can share their perspective and their views on how that project has impacted their local community. So don't speak for other people, try and let them speak for themselves. You can go even further by co-authoring the piece with someone from that particular region. So when planning your next communication campaign or your ocean science story, you do need to consider how to make that narrative as inclusive and diverse as possible. And that does include ages, genders, backgrounds, locations, cultures, and everything else in between. So not only does this help ensure that those different voices are heard, but also it often makes for a more compelling read and will reach a far larger global audience. So communicate to people, not to them. So just as science doesn't stop after the paper is published, communications shouldn't stop after the story is written. It's not just about what you deliver, but how you deliver it. Delivery is important, and ocean science communicators should try to create a two-way dialogue with the audience when sharing the article on social media or a presentation in person. And often that could be achieved as simply as asking a question during a presentation and just trying to get the audience to interact with you and to make some comments and suggestions. Giving the audience a platform to engage with the content will help transfer some of that ownership to the audience, and therefore they'll be more likely to remain emotionally invested in the topic for longer. And as I've mentioned before, if they're more emotionally invested, they're more likely to accept changes needed to make a difference to ocean health. So finally, and something that is very important in the context of the Ocean Decade as well, is to consider the long-term narrative. So one of the challenges for ocean sustainability is that a lot of the solutions require changes to policy or public behaviour. For this to happen at a reasonable pace, there needs to be a narrative around the topic already present and for the public to have already brought into the importance of protecting the ocean. But we also need to be careful of ocean news fatigue. So we see this with climate change, for example, where as soon as you see a negative story about climate change, then people often switch off because they don't want to, they almost feel like there's nothing really they can do, so they prefer not to hear it. However, through the Ocean Decade, we have got the opportunity to shape a narrative of hope around ocean solutions, and everyone will need to take part to help build that narrative. Also, ocean science communication should be considered as an ongoing process, not thought as an individual action, but contributing towards the wider global narrative around the ocean and environment. So having a long-term communication strategy that outlines what you will communicate, when, but also how that message will be delivered will be important for achieving the change for the ocean that we want. And that's it. That's just a very quick summary. There is, as everyone else has said so far, there is a lot to talk about under this topic, but they're kind of the main points that I hope will be beneficial to everyone watching today.
Thank you very much, Kira. That was absolutely insightful and very, very helpful, hopefully, for all of our participants. I would also like to reiterate the invitation to all the attendees to really go and look at the special issue on the Ocean Decade of Echo Magazine. And for that, on behalf also of the IOC Executive Secretary, Dr. Vladimir Ryabening, thank you, Kira, to you and all your team for the fantastic work behind that very important issue. Thank you once again. Now we are, yes, we're a bit late for our Q&A session, but I see that for now we haven't received any questions through the Q&A box through Zoom. I would like to open the session anyways, even if we have about 5 minutes to answer to questions coming. So please feel free to talk or to type your name in the Q&A so that we know that you need the floor. Please. Okay. That was it. Pilar, do you want to talk? I see in the chat box. Okay, thank you. There's a question coming. Okay, while Pilar is typing her question, I see another one in a Q&A box by Victor Kuawuhara. Sorry about my super bad pronunciation. How to engage persons who have absolutely no connection with the ocean? Very interesting question. I think that both Vinny and Kira could reply to this one. So please, or both of you.
Kira, if you want to go ahead, I would just preface anything by saying that there is no such person that has no connection with the ocean. We just have to get them to realize what that connection is.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said as well. There is often it's not as obvious, especially with people who may not see the ocean physically or live that close to it, but there is always that link there to the ocean in their lives. So I think that probably just means you would need to do that little bit extra work just to understand who it is that you're talking to and where that connection is that they can relate to. It's all about just making it relevant to their everyday personal and professional lives, but there is always a link there.
Thank you very much to both of you. I'm going back to the chat because I see now Pilar's question. I started working with a project in an association focusing on ocean and climate, and we find it difficult to start reaching to people. Which recommendations do you have to take off with our project? I remember from your presentation, Kira, that you were specifically mentioning the sort of climate change fatigue that now people have. Would the ocean be smoothen a little bit that fatigue, in your opinion?
I think there is a danger that we could go down the same route as the climate change narrative, which I really hope that won't happen, which is why it's so important now that we start off, we continue to grow this narrative that is positive, it's around solutions, and that we're also empowering people, just individuals or businesses, so they feel like they can make a difference. I think one of the issues with climate change is that people kind of feel like they can't do anything. They're recycling as much as they can, but it obviously doesn't seem to make an impact, so they switch off to it. So I think it's just making sure we're controlling that narrative now at the beginning, so we're not following down that more negative route of that puts people off, but that people want to stay engaged because they can see that what they're doing is making that difference, and that they should continue to do so.
Thank you very much, Kira. Also, I hope on behalf of Pilar. Kira, I'm sorry, there are a lot of questions for you, and so this might be the last one, but it's about how we can avoid the risk of propaganda campaign when we talk about ocean science, and what we would like to, and if we would like to promote a scientific conscious and awareness for citizen science. I'm reading now the full question of Kemal. Those phases are delicate matters to deal with, experts on communication and media collaborating with scientists, aren't they? So basically, I think they're referring to how we could collaborate maybe on a daily basis with experts from different fields in order to convey the right message and not and avoiding propaganda.
Yeah, so it's difficult because obviously at the beginning, it's avoiding the propaganda. You kind of need to make sure that we have a good collaboration and network in place to communicate to the media, so they understand that if they are going to be broadcasting a particular message in a particular way, what impact that actually has. So we almost need to make sure that the media are on board. So when they are sharing these messages, that it's kind of hopefully in line with what they need to happen in order to maintain their audiences, but also to share that right narrative that in a way that needs to be shared, is a very difficult and complex thing to control. which is why it's so important for, I think, individuals to take ownership of that communication as well, and to try and broadcast what we're doing in a way that we can control that narrative as widely as possible. But yeah, there's no simple solution to this, but it's, that's probably one of the main points. Is that answering all of the question? Was there any more?
I think we're done with your questions, Kira. Thank you very much, and that was hopefully a good answer for our participants. I see that we're starting to run out of time. There was a very nice question for Ronaldo, and Ronaldo already answered about possible work together on Blue Schools. I don't know, Ronaldo, if you wanna maybe have a last line on that, and also try to answer to our last question in the chat box, which is how can we connect students' life to ocean literacy? I'm curious about the educational situation with ocean literacy. Over to you, and then we'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Very quickly, I think that how can we connect students with the ocean literacy? Related to the first question of Victor, how to engage persons sometimes with absolutely seems no connection. I would say let the students tell us what to do. In the Blue School concept, we do that. We show them what is the ocean literacy concept, like the ocean is in your life, you are breathing it now. So tell us, how can you work better and know better about the ocean, and they teach us how to do. And the UNESCO networks of schools is a great opportunity for that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ronaldo. I would like now maybe to leave the floor to Francesca for a closing, a very rapid closing. Francesca, please.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, everybody. I'm really happy to have organized this webinar with Elisabetta. At the beginning, it was going to be only on ocean literacy, but then we thought, discussing the links between similarity, differences between ocean literacy and ocean science communication is really a topic that we want to, and this webinar showed that we need to have more time to discuss these topics. Just closing, I really would like to thank all the speakers, and also the technical support and interpreters who helped us a lot. And in closing, I really would like to invite you to share your stories about ocean science communication, ocean literacy, because we are listening to our practitioners, experts, people who are interested, and they all tell us that the most important thing is networking, exchanging ideas, not starting from scratch, but instead building on what the others are doing. So this is one of our main goals for the decade in ocean literacy, and also, of course, in ocean science communication, creating new bonds, creating new networks. We really think this is the way forward. So thanks, everybody, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day.